Final Major Project by Becky Bell. I acknowledged the need and the desire to reposition my practice, so my final major project was an exploration of ideas and concepts centered around this. During this presentation, I will outline the steps I have taken to achieve this. My pursuit in the MA program wasn't centered around producing aesthetically pleasing outcomes. Rather, I aimed to utilize the postgraduate program to position, reflect, think, project, and determine my desired path and the means to reach it. I did this through these projects listed here. They are a combination of both live, collaborative, personal, as well as some unmentioned projects that can be found on my Padlet. Commencing the presentation by addressing administrative communication and documentation is essential. The documentation plays a crucial role in attaining various learning outcomes. I started by laying out my months with essentials such as project deadlines, research trips, and personal affairs. I would then make a weekly to-do list corresponding with the monthly overviews that would fit specific projects. This was crucial to keep on top of my projects during this module, and a practice I reused from learning outcomes in CPP and carried through to the final major. At the start of this module, I took the learning outcomes and module purpose and extracted all of the things I felt were important for my practice and personal development. The full list can be found on my Padlet. One of the things I felt was very crucial during final major project is the expectation of independent work with one-to-one tutoring support and additional support through group seminars, workshops and online resources. Talking through my projects with my tutors and peers in a more casual setting in class was really helpful. It's from these simple conversations and passing comments I was able to really try and get the most from the things I was working on at the time. Another important aspects I took from the module purpose and the learning outcomes was the importance of key readings, practitioner research and fundamental research. It was important for me to have theoretically informed research and focus on choosing relevant topics in my discipline. One of the ways I did this was by conducting specific research trips and attending events with the opportunity to network, such as overlap. I also found that if these exhibitions and galleries events I didn't directly affect my practice or project, it was never a waste because of the importance of keeping informed on historical, cultural and contemporary work. More information on these can be found on my Padlet. At the start of the module, I took a visit to Tate Liverpool to see J.M.W. Turner's work, Dark Waters exhibition, where his work aims to capture the essence and atmosphere rather than detailed realism. This was motivated by my daily comic project that I had started in CPP. I also went to see Culmination, since stamp making has played an important role in my work since CPP. It was really interesting to see how other people use stamps to create. Finally, I was invited to the private opening of The World That Belongs to Us. This is a new exhibition at the New Art Gallery in Warsaw where I volunteer. This exhibition is interweaving autobiography and activism, breathing life into conversations that transverse the realms of community and belonging, friendship and intimacy, migrant and dysphoric storytelling, resonating with the profound intersections of personal narrative, social change, and the creation of queer worlds. Visiting this exhibition and conversations between myself and tutors has helped me form the theoretical theming behind my George Jackson proposal. I will go into further detail about this near the end of the presentation. One of the strands of my final major project was my attempt to find ways to avoid entering a print room and just using available resources. Although it wasn't explicitly mentioned, I explored alternative methods beyond standard printmaking approaches. Simultaneously, I sought out ways to avoid excess resource consumption. Another aspect involved exploring storytelling and conceptual exploration through the reuse of materials, and finally, another strand focused on enhancing the accessibility of various print rooms and workshop environments. During my artisan residency, I helped guide Samuel, a fellow MA student, through the process of monoprinting. This technique he had never done before. Being given the opportunity to share my knowledge and practice is something I really enjoy. During my artisan residency, I was particularly interested in alternative methods and materials to use whilst printing, so I started by researching other practitioners who do similar things to see if their approaches could directly influence my practice. More information on my findings can be found on my Padlet. Through innovation and experimentation, research, and working through how I can make the print room more accessible, I started with using a pasta maker and recycled cans to see if they can be used to create prints. I continued with the theory of learning by doing here. This wasn't an easy process and it took a number of attempts to be able to make this successful, but I was able to create prints using these materials. There are more process videos and information available on my Padlet. After the success of my recycled can and pasta maker print, I decided to reflect back on my earlier research and try the same technique with Tetra Pak, using the same processes but with different materials to continue my knowledge in this field. I then started to experiment with more household and readily available items such as old packaging, tin foil, and even lollipop sticks. Again, using the same process as before, but some of these came out more successful than others. I then needed to start thinking about how I was going to document all of my findings through learning by doing. One of the deliverables I proposed in my artist in residency application was the documentation of my work. This had turned into a little micro project. Through CPP module and final major project, Stephen Fowler has been a fundamental part of my research. By looking at his practice and how he produces work is very interesting to me, since I feel like it is based more on the practical side of making. I found in a volume of Pressing Matters and on his social media some small guides on how to print, and this was the starting point for my own small zine and documenting the things I had learned through my hands-on experience and experimenting in the print room. My process for this documentation was to use my sketchbook and draw out all the things that I'd been doing to create the prints, even down to drawing the different materials and tools used for the process. I sketched these out several times until I was happy with how they looked before scanning them in and editing them digitally. I then started the process of creating the zine, making sure that all the information was there and the layout was easy to read. I did this with Photoshop. I really wanted to utilise the entire zine, so I decided to create a small poster-type print on the back of the zine with the collection of all the tools you need to create an intaglio print with a pasta maker, giving the zine another function and purpose. I then took these designs and ran them through the Riso machine. One of the things I really love about the Riso is the chance of accidents and misprints and the layering of all the different colours, giving me the opportunity to be playful with the designs that I had created. The zine unfolds to be an A3 size and is both functional and informative. It is part of my artisan residency documentation, but also my submission in my MA program. After submission, I am then going to reach out to Pressing Matters to see if this is something that they might potentially be interested in. As part of the repositioning of my practice, I was invited to co-host at the Night School Print Club Birmingham. This has been one of the most fundamental parts of this module for me. I got to experience what it is like to be part of a workshop that wasn't in the safety of the classroom, unlike didactic. I was also collaborating with Print Club Birmingham, which is a first for me. I used my knowledge of printmaking with unconventional items to help guide my way through this workshop and by sharing my knowledge. Because of this opportunity, I got to really evaluate and reflect on what direction I want my practice to take. There's my role as workshop leader and my preferred method of sharing knowledge and educating, which at present doesn't involve academic teaching. I find fulfillment in conducting practice-based workshops that are crucial to acknowledge. Whilst this preference might evolve in the future, I currently get great satisfaction from participating in workshop environments, sharing and learning through hands-on experiences. After co-hosting with the Print Club Birmingham, I then was a participant in a workshop with Andrew Coleman. I used my time in this workshop to not only use active experimentation, but more importantly, reflective observation. I used my time to really listen and watch how Andrew teaches a workshop. I then spent time with him asking him questions about his own practice and decision-making when creating work. There was a real emphasis related to future academic or professional development by having this opportunity. Observation is a really important learning technique, and it was really beneficial to see how Andrew teaches a class. From this workshop, not only did I get to observe different teaching methods, I was also able to learn some new printing techniques. I learned about different materials like the Japanese tissue and how to print without using a big press. Will come in handy with my artist in residency research. During this module, I started volunteering at the new art gallery in Warsaw. One of my main roles whilst volunteering is to help the artists run the Sunday Art Club workshops. This is another opportunity I've used to observe different teaching methods and approaches. Here are some of the workshops that I have played a part in. One of the really beneficial things about volunteering at the gallery in these workshops is not only networking and the reflective observation, but listening to theoretical aspects around the workshop themselves. Some of the artists design their workshops around pieces available to go and see already inside the gallery. I personally find these workshops that have a more clear theoretical background not only to be more engaging and interesting, but a lot easier to explain to the participants. Gathering all this information is really beneficial for my own practice and creating my own workshops. This was the latest workshop that I helped volunteer with. The theme behind the workshop was nature zines. This is one of the workshops that didn't have a strong connection with any of the pieces in the gallery, but it was a workshop where I was able to put my prior knowledge to use. I have a good understanding of zine making and was able to help and guide participants with full confidence when creating their own. I also used this opportunity to create my own nature zine to help inspire participants that may be struggling with ideas. I used all of the available materials to create this. New York Research Documentation Trip and Outcome. This is one of my micro projects during this module. It was a research-based project. There is more information on my Padlet, but this project started because I was interested in how artists and other creatives document and capture travel. This project is research-based and started out with no intention of a final outcome apart from the potential of new knowledge. I started by looking at Grace Helmer's It's Nice That article, where she talks through her process of documenting her trip to Japan and Taiwan and the different things she could do, like painting in her sketchbook as well as collecting tickets and other miscellaneous ephemera. There are other interesting articles on It's Nice That, like David Graham's Long American Road Trip. I've put my findings on Padlet. As part of the documentation of my trip, I too, like Grace Helmer, collected tickets and ephemera from the trip, as well as taking photographs on a Polaroid. I then started painting in a concertina sketchbook using tickets and all the materials I had with me to document things around me. Here are some of the more theoretical aspects identified and developed through my CCP module that I revisited in Major Project. Going back to the research I did with Stephen Fowler's rubber stamping and the rubber stamping in the Japanese train stations, the Ikai stamps, I wanted to bring these things that I'd learned in that past module forward into this module and in my research project. Reflecting on my past research, I created stamps from iconic places and themes throughout the city. I wanted these to be easily recognisable. I then thought about how I would put these stamps into more context. So I thought about how there are lots of photo booths scattered around the city, but they all come with like strange like branding, like stuff that doesn't really make sense to the location. And then I thought about the research I'd done on the Japanese Ikai stamps. And I combined the two ideas together. So I just used these stamps to create like iconic little icons and such to go on like photo booth photos. This was just an idea. And obviously playing around with that concept, I just thought it was interesting how my research, this is how my small research project on documenting travel ended. This project serves as a collaborative platform designed for the final showcase on carlapool.com. Carla Pool and Ranja Durad collaborated with practitioners such as myself as part of their India UK Industries at 55 project, supported by the AHRC and Innovative UK. This opportunity came to me from taking part in a rerun design in the last module. The starting point for this project was themed around environmentalism, so I started looking at my own environment and doing some observational reportage illustration. These are practices I took from the last 2 modules. I then started thinking about safe spaces and trying to incorporate that into the starting point of this project. Thinking about safe spaces and my environment and all of the research I've done throughout this entire MA program, I started making some stamps and documenting like the spaces around me using stamps as well. I found that since I have such a solid background in research of this would be a strong place to start, as I didn't feel like super confident in this project because the theme felt really vague and like I wasn't sure on how to begin. One of the proposals for the moving on with this project was to each create our own image inspired by images before us. Since there are 5 participants, there was 2 images before me. I think this was to help us collaborate and move forward with the project. This is something we discussed in several meetings. Using the images that had been sent to me, I started thumbnailing different ideas in my sketchbook on how I could project my own thoughts and be inspired by those images before. I was really interested in the image of the lungs, and I wanted to incorporate that into my picture somehow. So that was a lot of the focus when creating my thumbnails. I also experimented with materials such as watercolours and pencils and pens, not really thinking too much about what I was using. I then ended up on this final piece. This is 2 trees that are supposed to represent lungs. I used the stamps that I had made throughout this module to create this image. I really liked the idea of like recycling materials and recycling things I'd already used, especially since the project is about environmentalism. So this really helped me move forward. I've also done it in a comic book style because after some research, I found that comic book are highly versatile mediums capable of conveying a wide range of themes and messages, and they are useful resources for tackling pressing global issues and bring positive changes in its. After we finished with the tasks and we had a meeting and went through everyone's work and talk about the history and the ideas and the concepts behind the images and the inspiration, we were then tasked with making 3 more images that would be exhibitioned on the Carla Pool website. These are just some quick thumbnails that I had sketched up. There are more on my Padlet. I really wanted to keep with the comic theme, so that was really important when thinking about how to move forward with this project. Going back to what I said earlier about recycling things, I then started thinking about the materials I was using throughout this project, and then started thinking about my artist in residency and how I was trying to recycle and reform ways of printing. So I then started to do some collagraphs, and I used recycled cardboard and recycled scrap paper to create these collagraphs to put through the printing press. I think it was really important to think not only about what I was drawing and illustrating, but the materials I was using to do so. Keeping on the theme of using recycled materials to create collagraphs, I then created these cityscapes to fit in with the thumbnails and the theme. I also experimented with using different coloured inks as well. This is something I hadn't done before, so it was a really interesting process. I have the black and white versions underneath as well. I also thought about the materials I was using, even with things like monoprinting. Normally the process for how I monoprint would be laying the ink down and then putting the paper on top and then using a pencil or pen to draw and create these lines. But because I was thinking about materials, I used found objects, like found branches and twigs to create sharp lines rather than traditional pencils. After collating all of my material together, I then started with one of the things I find the hardest, which is composition. I used Photoshop to mess around with the different compositions and to see what was best. Obviously, I used my thumbnails as a guide, but sometimes I find that my roughs can look better than my final pieces. So the thumbnails don't always work out. So this was a slow process, but something I had to work through. These are the 3 final images that are going to be exhibitioned on the Carla Pool website. I wanted them to work as a collective, but also I wanted them to be able to stand alone. It was really important for me to use my research on like how comics can inspire and really convey messages, as well as the materials used throughout this project. I'm really pleased with how these turn out, and I had great feedback from my peers and everyone that was involved in this project. During my research in the Environmentalist UK project, I stumbled across this publishers called Colossus Press, and then looking at their manifesto, which was "Whatever your story, it's worth telling," I decided to reach out to them to see if they would like to collaborate. These are the zines that I'd bought from Grosh Comics with other artists that I had collaborated with. They're all personal stories about their lives, and I just thought the whole concept and the structure of the zine itself was really interesting. And obviously, I really there was something really great about their like manifesto, and something that like really aligned with my own practice as someone who does a lot of personal based work or is inspired to use their own personal experiences within stories. So I reached out to Colossus Press and asked them if they'd like to collaborate. They agreed and sent me some examples on how to construct my own cartography. The story I'd asked them to collaborate with me is a retelling of a zine that I had made during my bachelor's degree called Be Brave, where I talked about having a disability and how my parents' love and support have shaped my life. They were really on board with me putting my story into their format as a tribute to my parents and a way of educating people on disabilities. Because this was a retelling, I wasn't sure on what approach to take, so I looked at more graphical research in case this is how I wanted to retell the story. This is Michael Perry's a category of hand type, and I felt inspired and started messing around with my own type just to see if I could do something with that and move forward in that direction. The more graphic approach wasn't really working out, so I actually referred back to a process I used in CPP for the Northern Illustration Fair, where I would take photos and draw from them in a more illustrative kind of style. This worked out better, and I was able to use photos I'd used in the original zine as well as a kind of like a tribute to the original story. I then continued playing around with like obviously drawing from the photos, but also like how I was going to lay this out, because this is like a very different process to what I normally do. So I tried with Photoshop. I also tried with cutting them out physically and like moving them around on a physical piece of paper. Like playing with composition is something that I've struggled with throughout my entire illustrative practice, so this was like a really good way of experimenting in a more like hands-on way, which I think is quite fitting because this is a really personal project, and being quite tactile with the project itself feels like appropriate. These are some of the illustrations that I'd done and compositions that I'd done that I thought would make the final cut. Again, I go through and edit them more, but this was when the project was slowly starting to come together and fit in a way that would fit their zines. After being happy with the the layers and the composition, I then started to edit them digitally so I could print them out and put them through the risograph, because I wanted to start experimenting with colour. I hadn't thought about colour when originally drawing them because of some advice Phil Cleaver had given the class, where he said if it doesn't work in black and white, it won't work in colour. So I thought it was really like a good place to start to make sure everything was in black and white first before experimenting further. And this is what the back of the cartograph would look like, using a lot of the images that I had drawn that didn't make the final cut for the front. I think it was really nice that I was able to still include them in the zine. So that was the process and the thoughts behind that. I then experimented with putting all of the stuff that I'd made through the risograph, including some of the roughs, actually playing around with different colour combinations, just seeing what works. I have mentioned this before, but one of the things I really like about the risograph is the opportunity for mistakes and misprints. And again, the riso is like a really hands-on, tactile sort of like process, which feels really appropriate for the zine itself, considering the story. It also pays tribute to like the photographs that I used. They are like amateur photos, like cheaply printed, and I think this is like a fun way of really highlighting that in a different process. After the risograph and a talk with my tutors, we found that maybe the main story, like once folded, was a little bit busy, and my visual language can still be quite busy, and it's something that I continue to work on throughout my entire practice. But again, these things wouldn't be realised without the importance of like tutorials and creating the zine physically and holding it. After having that tutorial and talking through that, I then pulled some of the textures back so the story was more concise and could be read more easily. These are the final designs and the final colourways that I decided on. These have been sent to the publishers and it is now currently in the process of being made. I think this was one of the really important projects for my final major, and after this I will have like something physical and something published. So on reflection, I am very happy that I put myself forward and was really vulnerable to share this story with the publishers and with the press and make this happen. As part of my submission for this module, I applied for the George Jackson funding. I present the initial draft of the proposal and conceptual foundation behind the workshop that sees the inevitable funding. Seizing this opportunity, I wish to elaborate on how I have expanded upon my original idea. Through tutorials and discussions, I have transitioned the workshop beyond its practical aspects, delving into more theoretical themes. Building connections with international peers during this journey has emphasised the significance of fostering meaningful relationships. Hence, the workshop has evolved into bridging borders, cultivating meaningful relationships and friendships through foam stamping and badge making. Although this proposal is still a work in process, I am actively refining it. All of my notes and the original application contribution to this ongoing development can be found on my Padlet. On my Padlet, there is a dedicated section to evaluation and reflection of my work. While it's evident from the presentation that I have met deadlines for live projects and successfully resolved some, it's crucial to emphasise that meeting these deadlines, whilst important, doesn't directly address the primary question posed by this major project. The ultimate goal of this major project was the repositioning of my practice and putting the foundations of a career in place. I think I have been successful throughout, and that is something I wanted to really celebrate. I feel like it's one of the things I've really mastered and I am able to move forward with. I have projects waiting after the submission and the proposal for the George Jackson funding as well. These are all inevitable starting my career. There is also a link to my Padlet, so all of the things that I've discussed but haven't been shown can be found there. Thank you.